Hello and thank you for joining us today for our quarterly briefing on the shopper confidence of the UK consumers. I'm Paul Langston and I head up our retail location strategy team here at CACI. Please join in and post your questions. I will do my best to answer them at the end of the agenda. So this is the agenda that we're going to be going through today. We're going to start with a brief recap. So apologies again for those who've joined previous webinars. I will cover this as quickly as I can, but in a way that makes sense to everybody who's new. So we at CACI have been working with our friends at BPS, that's the British Population Survey, for more than 5 years to track shopper confidence on a monthly basis. This analysis is based on BPS asking a large and demographically stratified sample the same question each month. And it's that one written in blue there. So thinking about your financial situation at present, how do you think it is likely to have changed, if at all, in 3 months' time? What we then do is look at the net difference between those saying things are going to get better versus those saying things are going to get worse, and we track this as a positive or negative percentage. So the key difference of our approach with BPS to monitoring confidence is that whilst the headline shopper confidence trend is interesting, and we're certainly going to look at that in more detail in a minute, it's when our Acorn classification comes in that we're able to look below trends, but below the headline rate, and see how different consumer groups are thinking, and we can then link these to their shopping behaviour, their brands, and the places where they shop. Okay, so that's enough of the introduction. Let's start as ever with what's going on at the headline level of shopper confidence. So the headline level of shopper confidence has risen by 1% over the quarter to end September at plus 11%. Now this rise may not be much, but it's an encouraging sign that the downward trajectory that I had feared at the end of the last quarter has now been broken. So whilst the overall picture could be described as pretty flat, I think that UK retail can take a bit of comfort from what could also be described as reassuring stability, given a background of continuing uncertainty from things like Greece's ongoing test match with the EU, Chinese economic crisis, possibly the negative news from the refugee crisis, and ultimately the bedding in of the new government that was taking place throughout this quarter. So this rise is also against the backdrop of some pretty depressing figures on footfall and sales figures over the summer months that had started to hint at a possible loss of confidence amongst UK shoppers. But despite the 1% drop in September, which I'll return to in a minute, at a headline level, I would say that this chart shows some pretty encouraging signs of a shift from a feeling of minor concern about the future by UK shoppers to some sort of a comfort zone. A few other points that bring me to that conclusion. Firstly, we saw plus 1 percentage point gains in each of July and August this year. Now this may not be much, but after 4 months that have seen either flat or negative confidence, this is the first time that we've seen a positive move of 1 percentage point or more since the 3 percentage step up between January and February, when we all breathed a huge sigh of relief after a pretty good Christmas. Secondly, in August, confidence touched about plus 12%. Now, if I wanted to be pedantic, it was a fraction of a percentage below that level and a fraction of a percentage below the level that we saw in February and March. But this is excellent news that it was at that level, as this was the highest level recorded since our records began at the beginning of 2010. And the third reason for some positivity here is that July and August also saw the return of the summer boost in confidence, which we see most years. When I presented in June on the previous quarter, I was concerned that we had not seen this trend this year, which is a marked rise in consumer confidence as the days get longer and the weather warmer. And at that point, I stressed concern that the only other year when this did not occur was the last time we had a general election. Now, more on that a little bit later. But in short, the good news is that we have seen this pattern this year now, albeit possibly delayed by the background of election uncertainty. So, at a headline level, my view is that confidence is still high at a headline rate among shoppers, and that the reason for relatively quiet tills over the summer months is that UK shoppers have actually made the most of the weak euro and taken some of their spend abroad. So, at a headline level, things seem to be looking pretty good for a strong retail Christmas. So why am I glossing over the fact that we saw a 1 percentage point drop in confidence in the last month? Well, quite simply, it's because it's a trend that we've seen pretty well every year. The only exception since our records began was in 2013, which stayed flat. Now, some will argue that it's the depressing feeling of the nights drawing in September, or dwindling memories of summer holidays and the drag of back to school that bring around that drop in confidence. However, I think that the decline in shopper confidence is more due to the realization that Christmas is around the corner and consumers realizing how much the next few months are going to cost. Because remember, our measure of shopper confidence explicitly asks people about how they feel their financial situation will change in the next 3 months. So the reason I draw this conclusion of it being more than just the September blues is that really it is more than just a 1 month blip. If I add this column here, which is September to December, with only one exception here, there is not a bounce back. The negative trend either continues or there is a flat lining to the end of the year. With regards to the exceptions, 2013's decline in confidence to Christmas seems to have simply been delayed by a month, reflected in the 3% drop to Christmas, whilst the 2012 climb in confidence to Christmas really marked the point where the economic recovery took hold, overcoming that seasonal trend with a general boost in confidence as we came out of the sort of double dip of the recession. So, again, at a headline rate, things are looking good, and there appears to have been a return to stability after a few months of negative trend. But remember, the key thing about the CACI BPS confidence tracker is that we can go below the headline trend and look at the behaviour of the different consumer groups. So let's now look at the behaviour of the different Acorn categories and see also which is this quarter's key Acorn category and Acorn Group. I'm well aware that this is a very busy chart, and don't worry, I'll animate it in a minute to help to illustrate key points. But the first major positive that I want to dwell on whilst on this slide is that this is the first time I have ever presented a 6-month chart where all 5 of the broad Acorn categories are showing confidence levels of plus 6% or more. So this is the longest period of detailed confidence across all of those broad categories for a whole 6-month period. And seeing a chart like this, it is easy to forget that up to as recently as May 2013, we had 38 consecutive months where at least one of these Acorn categories was in a negative territory. So in other words, month on month, at least one of these bars was saying that they feared their financial position wasn't going to get better, but was actually down here saying it was going to get worse. We have now gone 22 consecutive months since we last saw an Acorn category dip into negative territory. And the last one of those was Rising Prosperity in November 2013. So, after all the economic turmoil of those years, we should be massively encouraged by this cross-demographic confidence over this prolonged period. But there are some key points that can only be seen if I animate this chart. So the next few slides are going to cover up various bits of this to illustrate some points. Let's start with another good news story by looking in more detail at the 6-month trend and by looking at the 2 least affluent Acorn categories. That's the orange being financially stretched and the bluey colour being urban adversity. It is great to see the lowest income category, the urban adversity, experience a 6 percentage point rise in confidence over the last 6 months. And what's particularly encouraging is that this has been a pretty steady rise in confidence throughout the period, only dropping back a fraction in September. It has to be said that this is quite a surprise, as I had expected to see more concern amongst such lower income consumers as a result of Conservative government policies starting to become more clear as the new government bedded in. But perhaps with tax credit changes not due to happen until April next year, there is currently a view that that's a problem for another time, It will be interesting to keep an eye on this next year. So it would appear that this least affluent Acorn category are happy that the general economic position is relatively stable. Maybe that is particularly against the context of turmoil being faced abroad, with people realising actually the UK seems to be in a pretty strong position. As a result of all this, and rather counterintuitively, the urban adversity are now, by some margin, the most positive Acorn category, having passed rising prosperity, heading in the opposite direction in July. More on that one in a minute. But a word of warning. We've been tracking this for a number of years now, and we have seen relatively high levels of confidence amongst this category before, and have tended to find that they are not the best barometer of economic trends. Now to the orange bar and the financially stretched. The good news for the financially stretched is twofold. Firstly, as the little green arrow shows here, they've seen a bit of growth. And secondly, as I'll discuss in more detail later, they have broken the 4-month negative trend, which I feared was reminiscent of their stark decline in confidence after the 2010 election. However, it should be noted that the headline figure for the financially stretched Acorn category is distorted by the inclusion in this broad Acorn category of the subgroup, or Acorn Group, student life within these figures. Now, they're not shown explicitly on this chart. Student life as an Acorn Group rocketed in their confidence to plus 25% for all of July, August and September. Now again, we've been tracking this for quite a long time, and this is a seasonal trend we see each year that those on the call with university-aged children will recognise as students having access to the bank of mum and dad over the summer months. This spike will inevitably settle back in the next few months when they start trying to live off the money that they saved up over the summer. But also within financially stretched, there is another Acorn Group who are the poorer pensioners. So while student life may be seeing booming confidence over the summer, poorer pensioners dropped down to a level of confidence of just plus 1% and are alarmingly close to heading back into negative territory, where they also spent October to December 2014 as the only negative Acorn subgroup. So clearly, the poorer pensioners remain a group whose concerns have not been allayed by the election. So pushing on with the Acorn categories, now let's take a look at the 3 most affluent Acorn categories, who we have tended to find are a better tracker of economic sentiment. If we compare the confidence today to confidence 6 months ago, we see that all of the 3 most affluent Acorn categories of consumer have seen a consistent and marked decline in confidence since April. Or we could say they've seen a marked decline since just before the May general election. Now that seems somewhat concerning, particularly when a Conservative majority is most likely to meet the approval of the more wealthy consumers. And this does imply that there are some concerns amongst the UK's highest earners and highest spenders and most influential business people about the underlying state of their finances. But still within these Acorn categories, the good news is that if we look just at the last quarter rather than the last 6 months, we see that the most wealthy Acorn category, the affluent achievers, have actually bounced back. You can see this plus 3% on the screen. Now, those of you who joined our last quarter webinar will be aware that I had genuine concern that from tracking their trajectory and comparing it to the pattern after the 2010 election, that this bunch of big spenders appeared to be heading alarmingly into negative confidence for Christmas. More on this shortly, but you'll see that that plus 3% is important positive news in trying to avoid that. But we are seeing that there is a continuing decline over the last 3 months among the other 2 Acorn categories. Whilst the decline in the green bar, the comfortable communities, is just about half a percentage point, so it is fairly negligible, it is never too good to see this large Middle Britain group of consumers on the decline, as they are key to so much mid-market retail. But the trend in rising prosperity is potentially more concerning, that drop there of 2% over the quarter. Because the rising prosperity are key to the retail and leisure economy. When indexed against the typical shopper using our unique shopper dimensions in centre surveys, we can see how valuable the rising prosperity are. The index figure here of 114 means that these consumers spend 14% more than the typical shopper. They shop 7% more frequently. When they go shopping, they spend a pretty typical amount of time in the centres on their trip. But when they're not in the shops, they spend a massive 36% more than average online. Although they're not big users of click and collect, again, when they do go to their shopping centres, they also spend big on food and beverage, spending 18% more than the typical consumer on those shopping trips on food and drink. So, rising prosperity are key consumers. They're key to the retail and leisure economy. And for this reason, I've named them this quarter's key Acorn category. And we'll drill into them in a little bit more detail. So, what is going on with the rising prosperity? I've already said that if you look at this bar here in July, they switched from being the most confident to the second most confident, with the urban adversity on the rise. Well, a couple of points here. The numbers on the charts show two things. Firstly, they have seen stagnation and slight decline for the whole of the 6-month period. It's actually 7 months, as just off the chart to the left here, they were at plus 17% in March, so they dropped 5 points over that period. This trend is clearly concerning and should be taken as a warning that these big spending consumers are becoming a little anxious. However, the second point that should be stressed to balance that out is that these are still big positive numbers. Whilst the trend is not great, they have maintained double-digit positive shopper confidence since February 2014. So these guys are still spending. And knowing this lot, they're still spending pretty big. If we break down that Acorn category into the two constituent groups, which are city sophisticates in the darker blue and career climbers in the slightly lighter one, we can see that both of those groups have followed the same trend. I've highlighted city sophisticates as this quarter's key Acorn group, and they have seen the trend slightly more accentuated. Since April, they have dropped from plus 20 to plus 15. That's a fairly considerable drop that has taken them from being the second most confident of the 17 Acorn groups to just number 6. Now, whilst it is early days to ring the alarm bells and the city sophisticates, as I've said, are still showing high levels of spend, brands like these shown on the screen should all take note of the risks as they are highly exposed to this consumer group, particularly if they have outlets in places like these shown on the screen. And actually, it should be stressed that city sophisticates, by definition, large numbers of them are found in London. So with the bubble that we've seen in the London economy, we should be a little bit concerned if this trend does continue of this group becoming less confident. So that's the key Acorn category and the key Acorn group of the quarter. Now let's spend some time looking forward to Christmas over the next 5 minutes or so. Now, those of you who were on the last couple of webinars will recognize this chart again. It's not the most pretty, but I've kept it for consistency reasons. In previous webinars, I've pointed out that I'd spotted an alarming similarity in the shape of the left-hand and right-hand parts of this chart. I was concerned that whilst we went into the 2015 election at a much higher level of confidence than we did in 2010, I feared what might happen if we did continue to follow the same trajectory after the 2015 election as we did in 2010. If you look there, quite frankly, those next few months were an absolute disaster for UK retail, as we plummeted deep into negative confidence over the next few months and had some pretty scary months. Well, you will be glad to hear that despite my warnings of slight concern about some of the most affluent Acorn categories, we can now see clearly that this headline trend has not been followed. The trend to September 2015 is much more positive than that downward trend to September 2010. Whilst in September 2010, the headline rate turned negative for the first time since our records began, we leave September 2015 at an altogether more healthy plus 11%. So now let's finish with a brief look at what this means at a more detailed Acorn category level in the run-up to Christmas. Again, some of you may remember that when I applied the Acorn category level trends from after the 20 election to the actuals from March 2015, I was again concerned that there was a very real risk, if we look down here at December 2015, that affluent achievers and financially stretched may be in negative confidence territory by Christmas. And at the last webinar, I was still concerned that that trend might be being played out. Well, now is our last chance before Christmas to see if that depressing outcome is still likely to come true, as I can compare my September forecast, which is the highlighted red area here, to what has actually happened in the CACI data for September. Again, there's good news here. So the good news is that my crystal ball got it wrong, or rather more importantly, we have seen that the uncertainty surrounding the general election, Greece and China, have not resulted in the shock to shopper confidence that we saw in 2010 after the election. To explain the graphic on the screen, on the left-hand side set of bars are the actuals for September that we've seen, and the right-hand side is the forecast that I put forward 6 months ago based on the trends that we were seeing then. The upward green arrows show where we are now more confident than my forecast, and the red downward arrows where consumers are less confident than my forecast. The best news is that the the headline figure here is 3 percentage points above my initial forecast that at this time of year we'd be at plus 8%. We've already covered this in my opening section on the improvements to headline confidence. Also positive, and also discussed earlier, is this rise in confidence of the two least affluent Acorn categories. This has now brought them well above my forecast, and as I pointed out earlier, the excellent news is that this pretty well rules out any risk that I had previously flagged of the financially stretched hitting Christmas negative territory. We can expect financially stretched will see positive confidence this Christmas. Similarly, the key sending category of affluent achievers that I also feared would be in negative territory Christmas are also now looking safe. They are 3 percentage points above my previous and worrying forecast. Now, the freak positive behaviour of rising prosperity after the 2010 election meant they went off the scale of excitement and shopping confidence. So don't be too alarmed to see that they were never going to reach that level of confidence if we forecasted it forward. So don't be too alarmed that they are now 16 percentage points below the forecast. They will still be in a strong positive position at Christmas, although as I've already raised concerns about through the webinar, I am concerned that they are drifting in confidence. But let's just end here with one other note of caution. The category that maybe we should be most concerned about as we look forward to the next 3 months are actually the comfortable communities. My forecast for them was less than 1 percentage point below where they actually sit now. And whilst they've been a fairly flat quarter, they have dropped 3 percentage points since March. If this trend continues, they could hit Christmas at just +2 or +3 percentage points. That is not a great position to be in and could be a major concern for mid-market retailers this Christmas. So let's wrap up with a summary of today's findings. I believe that these figures show that there is now stable shopper confidence against an uncertain backdrop, particularly against the previous few months of negative trend. We have seen that the Christmas slowdown has started, and I would argue that this is a Christmas slowdown. It is a trend we see every year, and it is more than just the September blues. We have seen the least affluent growing in confidence due to ongoing stability. But we have seen big spending, rising prosperity showing some signs of concern, And we've also seen slight warning signs for both mid and upmarket consumers, and in turn retailers that they shop at. But to end on a positive, I'm now confident that this Christmas all Acorn categories will go into the Christmas period with positive confidence, which is something that I was not in a position to say 3 months ago. So the stability is there. If there are still some questions, we would expect the year to be ended in positive territory across the Acorn spectrum. So that is all I wanted to say from my slides. I'm conscious it's almost exactly past now, so thank you for listening. If you want to know more, there are contact details that I'll leave on the screen. But please fire away any questions. I will attempt to answer them. If you don't get an answer in time, then track me down on these emails. Okay. Now, someone has asked me the question, Graham from Boots, you've asked me the question of what is the BPS sample size, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't answer that. In all previous versions of this, I've had it scribbled on my notes because I knew someone would ask that question. I will email you back with that. It is sizable, is all I can tell you, and sorry I can't answer it better. Graham, again at Boots, has asked the question, are there any regional patterns that you can share, north versus south or London, etc.? The data as we use it from the BPS for this survey, we intentionally only get at the national level. We can get more detail, and it's probably worth us talking to you about it in more detail on, I think, the call that the webinar we did just after the Scottish election. We did a specific Scotland versus the rest cut. But again, I don't have that information. But I think do be aware that the fact that the Urban Prosperity Group are starting to slide a little bit, you could take as a little bit of a warning that given so many of them are in London, there is a bit of a risk against London. Okay. There's another question here. Do you think that the election of the government in 2010 caused uncertainty compared to 2015? As in 2015, we became used to the Conservative government, thus avoiding the same drop. And yeah, I think there were a number of things going on that, yeah, as I showed on the slides, we went into 2010 in a much more nervous position. I think there was a very, if you had time to look at that bar of the 2010 drop, we basically, there was an ongoing trend of drop. There was about 2 or 3 months where we almost held our breath around the election because no one had a clue what was going to go on. We weren't sure how the consortium was going to work. I don't mean consortium, do I? But the Conservative Liberal joint thingamajig. But I think once people saw what was happening and how that was bedding in, we then headed very rapidly into negative territory. The fact that, yeah, people were fairly used to a Conservative government, there hasn't been that same jolt. I genuinely feared a few months ago that because of Greece and China in the background, that could be the jolt that might send us back into that spiral. It's great that we haven't. And yes, it does seem that there is a level of stability. Jonathan Chubb has asked a question about the size of Acorn categories in terms of overall spend. I'm not sure I entirely understand that question, but yeah, so how, again, I can get in touch with you directly. I think you're at Boots, but yeah, we do have information around how much each of those Acorn categories spends. Today I focus only on one of those by putting up the shopper dimensions figures. So boom, boom, this one here. Yeah, so where's it gone? Here we go. We have that same information for every single one of our Acorn groups and Acorn categories. So yeah, I've only focused on this one today. They do spend 14% more than the average consumer, 18% more on food and beverage. I'm more than happy to share that with you and anybody else who needs it. Okay, and I think other than a bit of feedback from someone, which was positive, I'll be glad to say, that's all of the questions. Has anyone else got any other things they want to send across? And yeah, Jonathan, you'll put a comment on how many people are in each of the Acorn categories. That's easy information for me to send you through our Acorn knowledge. Anna Selby, you've just added a question. How did the shock in shopper confidence in 2010 impact actual Christmas performance? I'm not going to speak for everybody on this call, but yeah, if those of us who remember it, they were pretty poor Christmas figures. It was not a good Christmas. And yeah, what we found, and again, I blocked out large chunks of it just to highlight the bits I wanted to show, but if you look at the bits hidden under this white block, you can see that where we said confidence was heading down here, we had pretty poor Christmas. We had a pretty poor Christmas here. We had a better Christmas. We had a pretty good Christmas. My feeling is we're heading into a much better place this year. Honey, you've asked the question of can we email you the slides? The answer to that is something I'd meant to say just now. We will be posting these on our website by tomorrow morning, and we'll be sending all of you who've attended a link to that, so please feel free to share it. The whole webinar will be up there. There's also an infographic that summarizes the key points. But if anyone specifically wants the slides as well, please just email me on the details shown on the end slide, and I will more than happily send that to you. Same, so Sean, you specifically said, can I share that slide with the bit blanked out? Not blanked out, no problem, I'll do that. Okay. That's all the questions that we got. Now, shout if there's anyone else that wants to add anything. I'll stay on for a few more minutes. There is the bit blanked out, so yeah, feel free to mull over that. I've cunningly also blocked out the months.